Long before state lines were drawn or capitals declared, Alabama was a land shaped by time, tide, and towering civilizations. For over 13,000 years, indigenous peoples thrived here. First the Paleo-Indians, then the sophisticated Mississippian cultures whose earthen mounds still rise from the soil, like silent sentinels of a forgotten era. At Moundville, one of the largest pre-Columbian settlements north of Mexico, complex societies governed by spiritual hierarchies cultivated maize, crafted exquisite pottery, and charted celestial paths. By the 16th century, European contact reshaped this world. Spanish conquistador Hernando de Soto marched through in 1540, bringing disease, disruption, and the first tremors of colonial ambition. Centuries later, the French and British would vie for control, but it was the land itself, fertile, forested, and threaded with rivers, that remained the constant. When Alabama entered the Union in 1819 as the 22nd state, it did so atop layers of erased histories, its destiny already intertwined with cotton, conquest, and the deep contradictions of American expansion. The soil that once nourished native corn now fed a booming cotton economy, one built on the backs of enslaved Africans. By the antebellum period, Alabama had become a cornerstone of the Deep South, its wealth measured in bales and bondage. Yet even in this era of oppression, resilience took root. In the quiet corners of plantations and hidden hush harbors, African traditions fused with new realities, forging a cultural bedrock that would one day fuel spirituals, blues, and the very heartbeat of the civil rights movement. In 1861, Alabama lit the fuse of a national cataclysm. It was here, in Montgomery, that delegates from seceding states gathered to form the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis as president. The state's Declaration of Secession cited the sanctity of slavery as its cause, a truth etched into the Confederacy's founding documents. Montgomery, briefly the Confederate capital, became the epicenter of rebellion. The Civil War devastated Alabama, though few major battles were fought on its soil. Instead, the suffering unfolded in homes, fields, and cities, stripped of men, resources, and hope. By 1865, when Union forces occupied Montgomery, the state lay economically shattered and socially fractured. Emancipation arrived, not as a jubilant finale, but as a precarious beginning. Freedmen faced black codes, sharecropping traps, and a white power structure determined to restore control. Reconstruction offered a flicker of promise. Black Alabamians voted, held office, and built schools. But by the 1870s, backlash surged. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized communities, and in 1901, Alabama's new constitution effectively disenfranchised black citizens through literacy tests, poll taxes, and grandfather clauses. For generations, the promise of freedom remained deferred, a wound that would fester until the mid-20th century. The mid-200th century transformed Alabama into the moral battleground of America. In Montgomery, a seamstress named Rosa Parks refused to surrender her bus seat in 1955, igniting the Montgomery bus boycott, a year-long protest that introduced the world to a young minister named Martin Luther King Jr. But the movement was not born in a day. It grew from decades of quiet resistance, NEACP chapters meeting in secret, black newspapers like the Montgomery Advertiser's rival Alabama Tribune amplifying truth, and churches serving as sanctuaries of strategy and song. In 1963, Birmingham, dubbed Bombingham for its frequent dynamite attacks on black homes, became the stage for a confrontation that shook the nation. fire hoses, police dogs, and children marching in the face of brutality forced America to see its own hypocrisy. Then came Selma. In 1965, peaceful marchers crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge were met with billy clubs and tear gas on Bloody Sunday. The images galvanized public opinion and spurred President Lyndon B. Johnson to demand the Voting Rights Act. Alabama, once a fortress of segregation, had become the crucible of democracy's rebirth. Beyond its civil rights legacy, Alabama forged its future in fire and steel. Birmingham, founded in 1871, was the only place in the world where iron ore, coal, and limestone, ingredients for steel, existed in one location. The city boomed, its skyline shaped by smokestacks and the towering Vulcan statue, symbol of industry and resilience. Huntsville, meanwhile, looked skyward. Once a quiet cotton town, it became Rocket City in the 1950s, when Wernher von Braun and his team of German scientists relocated there to develop America's space program. From the Saturn V that carried astronauts to the Moon to NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, Alabama helped win the space race and redefine human possibility. Today, the state balances tradition and transformation. Auto giants like Mercedes-Benz and Hyundai anchor a modern manufacturing economy, while universities and tech hubs nurture innovation. Yet Alabama never forgets its roots, its music, its storytelling, its food, each a thread in a complex cultural tapestry. Alabama confronts history with uncommon honesty. In Montgomery, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, often called the Lynching Memorial, suspended 800 steel columns, each bearing the name of a county and its victims of racial terror. Nearby, the Legacy Museum traces the through line from enslavement to mass incarceration. This is not mere remembrance, it's reparative truth-telling. Founded by the Equal Justice Initiative under Bryan Stevenson, these sites challenge visitors to see lynching not as isolated horrors, but as systemic tools of racial control. Statues of Confederate generals are increasingly contrasted with markers honoring civil rights foot soldiers. The state's landscape itself has become a dialogue. The Dexter Avenue King Memorial Baptist Church, where Dr. King preached, stands blocks from the Alabama state capitol, where George Wallace once declared, "Segregation forever." In this proximity, Alabama forces a national conversation about who we memorialize and why. Alabama's story is not confined to textbooks or monuments. It lives in the voter registration drives in rural counties, in the classrooms teaching inclusive history, in the jazz clubs of Birmingham echoing with the spirit of John Coltrane and Sun Ra. The state embodies America's greatest paradox, capable of profound cruelty and extraordinary courage. From the Creek Nation's resistance to Andrew Jackson's removal orders, to the Selma marches that expanded democracy, Alabama has repeatedly been where the nation's conscience is tested, and sometimes redeemed. Today, as debates over history, voting rights, and justice continue, Alabama remains a beacon, not because it was perfect, but because its people dared to demand better. In its soil, its songs, and its struggles, Alabama offers a timeless lesson that progress is never given, but claimed by those willing to walk, march, and dream toward a more just horizon.